All right, here we are. We finally made it. The end of the plague. So, judging by the responses from most of you who read this, you didn't like it. So, and I apologize for that. I just want you to know that give it a shot when you're a little older and see what you think then. There's so many interesting discussion points in here that I was hoping we would be able to have. There's so many good messages hidden in amongst all the darkness, and I think that's what literature is about. Presenting a real face to humanity, and which isn't always smiley, guys. Let's just be honest. But then also showing you the little glimmers of hope that can keep us going. And even with a philosophy like Camus, which is very hopeless at times. I mean, most of it is, but the fact that there are still these little glimmers in it are really nice for me. And the idea again of someone who, regardless the fact that they have no real spiritual basis for their belief, still believes the importance of doing good for others. I think that's a real message to those of us who claim to be Christians and to be believers, who would much rather worry about our own selves instead of those around us. So I think that's important. It's something that I've really stressed in my life over the last decade, and become a very big proponent of caring for everyone. And I hope that maybe a little bit of this book helped you guys realize that, especially people we consider to be the other, people who aren't like us. I think we should really try to embrace the destruction of that term. So anyway, don't need to get preachy with you. Let's hit the end of this. So we're starting with section 3, which we find starting on page 281 of your book. Okay. Something weird is happening here, and I'm going to make an assumption, and that's all it is. I've done no research on this. Ryu keeps talking about a fresh start. He says things like, yes, he'd make a fresh start once the period of abstractions was over. Let me back up, actually. There was another part. It says, if the telegram, too, that he waited brought good news, Ryu would be able to make a fresh start. The only telegram I think he's waiting on has, I think maybe people try to say it's the one about the town opening back up, but I seem to think it has something to do with his wife, because he keeps talking about making a fresh start. I think there's this, at the end of this chapter, his wife she's going to die. He's going to get a message that she's dead. And it says that because of the death of someone else, he's able to absorb that. I think he's kind of waiting on it. Now, I could be completely wrong, but when they start talking about fresh start and everything, the way they highlight it here, I really think that's it. And I don't know why, but that's just what I think. Again, we find out now that Teru has gotten ill. So, Gran got sick and got better. Now Teru's sick, so maybe he'll get better, right? Well, of course we know that's probably not going to happen. Ryu again decides he's going to bend the rules and care for his friend himself. So he keeps him there with his mother, who also is very, at risk for catching the plague. But she seems to, his mom's a cool lady, man. If you didn't read carefully, his mom's just basically like, hey, you know what? I've lived a long time. I'm doing everything I can. If it happens, it happens. But I'm not going to be scared of anything. So, man, what a cool lady. Now, Teru does make Ryu promise him. He says, look, no matter what happens, you be honest with me about stuff. Because he's seen Ryu not be honest with people before. Not because he's a bad person, but, when somebody asks you, hey, did my child suffer in death? I mean, what's the purpose in telling them, yeah, it was horrible. It was miserable to watch them suffer. It's one of those things where lying about that is understood, to be honest. But if you go to page 284, we know what Teru is expecting. It says, thanks, I don't want to die, and I shall put up a fight, but if I lose the match, I want to make a good end of it. Bending forward, Ryu pressed his shoulders. No, to become a saint, you need to live, so fight away. Remember, Teru's the one who doesn't believe in God, but's obsessed with saintliness. So we know Teru kind of expects to leave, but he wants to leave on a good note, which I think we all should wish for that. It's ironic, though, that after all he's done, and all he's done good, and all he's done right in this book, we rarely see Teru making any kind, I think my glasses are crooked, that's bothering me, any kind of mistakes in what he does. And for us to be right at the finish line, for him to look like he's going to die, just shows you again how unfair all of this is, which, has been a motif throughout this, in my opinion. Just, things like little children dying, people who are good people dying, and stupid Qatar never even getting sick. 285, we also get a cool line that I don't really talk about much, but I just love it. It says, the only way in which he might help was to provide opportunities for the beneficence of chance, which too often stays dormant unless roused to action. And here's the cool line. Luck was an ally he could not dispense with. And that's the doctor. He's saying, a lot of what he does is just down to luck. He knows that, and that's kind of a cool statement. Teru tests Ryu's honesty at one point. He wakes up in the morning and his breathing's better, and he's like, "That's a good sign, right, Doc?" And the doctor's like, "No, you and I both know that people tend to feel better in the mornings with this." And Teru's like, "Good, thank you," because Teru knew that. Yeah, and then there's a section again that shows Teru suffering through the last moments of his life with the plague. It is not a pleasant thing. It's very similar to what the little boy Jacques went through. The only reason this one is easier to take, it's not because we're numb to it. We've only seen it twice. You don't get numb to something after 2 times. It's because Teru's a grown man. A child suffering is something that anyone with a soul struggles with, to be honest with you. All right. At 289, and we see now at this point, we really see this Ryu kind of falling apart, all right? And one of the things this narrator does that I'm really proud of is this, he really presents it. This kind of is still a frame story, okay? We talk at the beginning where the narrator says, I'm collecting these stories from my own firsthand experience and some journals and blah, blah, blah. So we know it's told through a frame. And the bitterness doesn't come out except here at the end. If you read The Great Gatsby, which my juniors are reading right now, the bitterness is apparent in Nick throughout, if you're looking for it. Here, it only comes out at the point that I feel like the narrator probably did get bitter, and that's the loss of his friend. Him and Teru were close. If you remember, we can back up to where they went swimming together, and I had to give you guys a lecture about don't put 2020 sensibilities into a book written in 1940. So these guys are close, and for him to lose his friend, especially when it looks like things are getting better, is just tough for him to take. He says, this is Teru, it says, when the end came, the tears that blinded Ryu's eyes were tears of impotence, and he did not see Teru roll over, face to the wall, and die with a short, hollow groan, as if somewhere within him an essential cord had snapped. Notice it says that the impotence, the fact that he couldn't do anything to help, just is really rough for him. Then, if you go a little bit further to 291, we get like Ryu's kind of summing up of the plague. He says, there's a couple of passages here, so let me read them both. He says, to love someone means relatively little, or rather that love is never strong enough to find the words befitting it. Thus, he and his mother would always love each other silently, and one day she or he would die without ever, all their lives long, having gone farther than this by way of making their affections known. Now, that part's not what I wanted to read. I apologize. But hey, it's a cool line too. Then we get to the part that I wanted to read. But what had he, Ryu, won? No more than the experience of having known plague and remembering it, of having known friendship and remembering it, of knowing affection being destined one day to remember it. So all a man could win in the conflict between plague and his life was knowledge and memories. But Teru perhaps would have called that winning the match. So he points out, he's like, oh good, what if I won? I'm still alive and I can think about all this stuff that happened. You know, one of the things that modern writers really put forth to us is the concept of, is death really the worst possible outcome for us? You know, you travel back to 17, 18, even further back literature, and you would say yes, death is the ultimate bad, but these writers really start to question that, and we're seeing a little bit of it here. I apologize for taking a sip every once in a while, guys. My voice is definitely on the wane right now. Then again, of course, we find out that at the end of this, Ryu's wife also passes away. Very much if you blink you miss it kind of statement. It says, that no doubt explains Dr. Ryu's composure on receiving next morning the news of his wife's death. I mean, bang, it's just right there. And then the last line here, he says, suffering was nothing new. For many months and for the last 2 days, it was the self-same suffering going on and on. It's like he kind of points out, well, this is what happens. People die. Everyone else has lost someone. Why not me? Of course, he's got a little bit of time to buffer this. If this was written as it happened, I assume that would be a little different story. So that ends section 3. We get into section 4, and the gates to town are finally reopened. So the plague is gone, supposedly, all right? And then we get a lot of images of families coming back together. It's kind of a happy section, to be honest with you, at least at first. 294, though, has a couple of cool things for us. Several of our characters, particularly Rambert in this section, is a little worried about now he has to go back to his life. Think about how long, and I'm not sure exactly the time, I apologize for not doing the math, but they've been locked up for a while, and then you have to get back to real life. And as much as we're ready for coronavirus to be gone, and we are, a lot of us getting back to real life is tough. I mean, I can remember setting foot in this classroom two and a half so weeks ago, being so ready to get back, but then I also remember that today, when yesterday when potential for a hurricane came through, I was like, well, if we get a day off, I can get caught back up, so maybe that's a good thing. I mean, and I know some of you are praying for us to get a day off, so I know that automatically shows how quickly we kind of get back to the everyday, and we let all the stuff we learned back in the bad times, we let all that disappear and we roll right back into the same nonsense. So Ron Bear thinks about that. He's like, now I got to go back to the real life. A guy who was dying to get out of town to go see his girlfriend is now like, I don't know how to even face her at this point. It says he knew it was out of the question now. He had changed too greatly. The plague had forced on him a detachment which, try as he might, he couldn't think away, and which like a formless fear haunted his mind. I mean, this thing's impacted him to the way he's pretty sure he can't make this work. So that's kind of sad. We get a really festive atmosphere in town at first. We get scenes like tomorrow real life would begin again with its restrictions. But for the moment, people in very different walks of life were rubbing shoulders and fraternizing. The leveling out that death's imminence had failed in practice to accomplish was realized at last for a few gay hours in the rapture of escape. So everybody's excited. They're spending time together, whether they're rich and poor, whatever. It's just that little bit of time. It's like when you're a very much bigger thing than if your team wins the big championship. And you see in the city, you see all these people hanging out together, hugging and everything else. People would probably not give each other the time of day outside of that instance. Going on, we get a cool little definition of what peace is in the mind of Ryu. I don't know if I would call it this. He says, others, fewer these, Teru may have been one of them, had desired reunion with something they couldn't have defined, but which seemed to them the only desirable thing on earth. For want of a better name, they sometimes called it peace. It's like the idea of finally getting something that you really believed in. It's not very specific, right? And then 300. 300, we get like the really big ideas about absurdism coming back. And looking at how Ryu kind of celebrates all of this. Let me knock that out. Ryu celebrating outside of the town. He's not part of all this celebration, okay? So let me find this section where I see the absurdism showing up again. Oh, where was it? Guys, I apologize. I don't see it. I guess it's this top line that I highlighted. It says, he was thinking it has no importance whether such things have or have not a meaning. All we need to consider is the answer given to men's hope. And I know that was probably what I was looking for. The idea that, meaning doesn't matter. That's the absurdist element. There is none, is their ideas. He says that all that matters is that we keep people having hope. Like I said, absurdism, despite being a very hopeless type of philosophy, at least it leans towards do good, because at least then there's some happiness for everyone, as opposed to things like nihilism, which there's no purpose, so let's burn the place to the ground, which is obviously not what we want. We do get an end note on a note of commentary about selfishness, when they state that, states the people who got what they wanted had mainly asked for things that depended solely on them, which is the only way to guarantee you getting what you want. It's if what you want depends solely on your accomplishment, nothing else. If that's the case, then yes, you can get what you want. Otherwise, you have to rely on luck some. Well, here we go. Section 5, the end. We finally learn officially who the narrator is, which you've known since the very first video. But, who's shocked by the fact this was Ryu? Why wait so long? Well, again, he wants to make sure he establishes himself as unbiased as possible, which I think he does a good job. As far as unreliable narrators go, Ryu doesn't all first-person narrators are unreliable, but he does a really good job of presenting himself as an authoritative figure. So, he does a good job. He's a good narrator. Ryu explains why he held off letting us know, and then proceeds to inform readers about the demise of Qatar. It's like, okay, here's my unbiased stuff. Here's why I did what I did. I wanted this to be clinical. I wanted it to be just a recollection without any lens to see it through. But let's see what happens to crazy Qatar at the end. So apparently Qatar has been hiding in the street, down in some little house somewhere or an apartment, and all the celebrating makes him mad because, of course, while everyone else is happy, he's in the pits of despair. So he decides to start firing his gun off at everyone. Apparently he's trying to, I don't know whether he's trying to get the cops to shoot him or what. I don't know what his end game here was. It looks like the typical suicide by cop move, but he doesn't pull that off. There's this horrid scene of him shooting a dog, and then I think it's him, not the cops, that shoot the dog. And then he eventually is captured and beaten pretty roundly when they catch him. and he's out of the picture at that point. So all the stuff he was fighting, he ends up putting himself in that situation. He didn't want to get arrested, so I don't know why shooting at things was his solution. Then we have Gron talking about he's rewritten the start to his masterpiece. Now, this is something that people miss that I love. He says he's chosen to omit the adjectives. In other words, he's taken out all the flowery description and just told it what it is, which I think that is such a big thing about this book is you can put all this heroic spin on things like what happens during this pandemic. But let me be honest, I have a wife who's a nurse, and she's gone to work every day like she's supposed to and doing what she's supposed to. She didn't wake up in the morning and have to drink a big thing of hero juice. She just did what she did. Most people, that's what they do in situations like this. It's, I have a job to do. I get up, I do my job. In all honesty, this book states that's not really heroism. That's just doing what you're supposed to, it's really easy for us to get all like, oh, that's a horrible thing to say. What these people are doing is heroic. But, the way our culture works, what are you going to do otherwise? You're going to stay home? All these grocery store clerks that went in, they have to pay their bills. They didn't have a choice. They had to go. So do we pat them on the back? Sure. Heroism's a bit of a big term, though. And I think that's one of the things this book's trying to show us is that, omitting all of the flowery nonsense when we talk about something puts the actual look on it and lets us realize that a lot of us are good people. There's no reason for everything to be separated out as this is special and this is ordinary and everything else. So, as we get to the end here, we're in the last few pages here, 307 and 308. A lot of good stuff on these two pages, by the way. So 307, we start with, let me find it. Oh, this one. I can't remember who's talking. I don't think this is Ryu. I think Ryu's talking to someone, a no-name character. But they say, there'll be speeches, he chuckled throatily. I can almost hear them saying, our dear departed. And then they'll go off and have a good snack. I mean, he's pointing out that how quickly all of this will fade and we'll be right back where we were, and which is kind of how this book ends. It's like, it's great now, but one day things are going to get back. How quickly we forget all of these things that we went through. Okay, and then here we go, last page of the book. So I don't know how well this camera's going to pick it up. I've got this highlighted all the way down here, so I want to read these, particularly the end. It says, Dr. Ryu resolved to compile this chronicle so that he should not be one of those who hold their peace, but should bear witness in favor of those plague-stricken people, so that some memorial of the injustice and outrage done them might endure, and to state quite simply what we learn in times of pestilence, that there are the more things to admire in men than to despise. Now, I love that. He says there's more good in us than there is evil. Now, you can disagree with that. I'm not getting on the theology of this. I'm not the Bible teacher, but I do like that idea that, let's quit focusing on the negatives and look at what we do right. It says, nonetheless, he knew that the tale he had to tell could not be one of final victory. It could be only the record of what had to be done, and what assuredly would have to be done again in the never-ending fight against terror and its relentless onslaughts. Despite their personal afflictions by all who, while unable to be saints but refusing to bow down to pestilences, strive their utmost to be healers. Now, those are all references back to lines he's dropped in this throughout, which is great. That's a good way to end. That's a conclusion. Mentioning unable to be saints, trying to be healers, if you're refusing to bow down to pestilences. Those are three different little motifs that have kind of gone throughout. But he points out in that paragraph that this isn't over. It's just a temporary respite. We're going to be back at this again. And indeed, as he listened to the cries of joy rising from the town, Ryu remembered that such joy is always imperiled. He knew that those jubilant crowds did not know, but could have learned from books, that the plague basilisk never dies or disappears for good, that it can lie dormant for years and years in furniture and linen chests, that it bides its time in bedrooms, cellars, trunks, and bookshelves, and that perhaps the day would come when, for the bane and the enlightening of men, it would rouse up its rats again and send them forth to die in a happy city. So that last line is it's like a horror movie ending. It's the plague is still asleep in these people's bedrooms and in their linen closets and in their, hope chests and things. And one day it could come back. And that's what it does, by the way. It very much so does that. So his idea here is, again, it's that idea of absurdism. You fight and you fight and you fight and you win a brief respite before you're right back at fight again. And, no matter how hard you fight, you're never going to win. But that doesn't mean you stop fighting. And that's the part where I'm like, okay, you guys, I'll read your book. I obviously don't believe the whole there's no purpose to life. But, if I was of that way of thinking, I would definitely want to believe like an absurdist that doesn't mean we give up living it. So Powerful ending. And again, I'm not sure why everybody hated this so much. I think there's a lot of really good philosophy in this. Well, I know why people hated it, because they had to read it. Then nobody wants to do anything like that, right? But anyway, guys, thank you for bearing with me, those of you who have been with me through this, especially if there was one of you in here who watched every single video. I would love to know about that. So, thank you for your time. I hope you do well on the test, and I hope that you'll enjoy as we move into British literature. Those of you who hated this, just think we got, romantic poetry coming up here and Victorian literature coming. So you're going to miss the days of the plague, let me tell you. But it's not that bad. I'm just teasing. But you will miss this, I think, some. And again, keep it on your bookshelves. Come back to it at a later date. It's really worth your time when you get a little bit of years on you and you start to see the world a little bit differently, all right? Okay, guys, well, that is the end. So thank you again for your time, and I will see you when we get into the Anglo-Saxon poetry and Beowulf section.